and welcome to Storyweavers, the podcast where we discuss anything and everything story-related.
Here, we'll delve into inspiration, plot, structure, character, and dialogue. Be it in books, movies, music, comics, television, or anything else, we'll be covering it from conception to reception.
We'll be discussing between ourselves as well as with other creators and fans about their experiences, routines, and techniques. Join us and find your next inspiration. We're your hosts, Dean Bradley
and John William Worth.
And this is Storyweavers. All right, welcome to Storyweavers. John, we're finally doing it.
Yes,
it's the introduction episode.
Woo, we're here at last. After a long, winding way.
Yeah, no kidding. So we just wanted to have a short, brief first episode here, just kind of introduce John and myself, give you a little bit of background on why we're doing this podcast. So I guess I'll go. I'm Dean Bradley.
The floor is yours.
I'm a big audio nerd. I'm a musician. I do voiceover. Big fan of fantasy books and just about any kind of reading, music. I'm a big metalhead. My favorite band is Coheed and Cambria. My dog's name is Cambria. I'm sure you'll hear me talk about her throughout the course of this podcast. And I've known John for probably about 8 or 9 years now.
2015, I think we met.
2014, 2015, around that time. So yeah, we've known each other for quite a while. We worked together in New York for a few years and have remained close friends and now working colleagues. Again,
yes,
but for ourselves and not for a corporation,
which is very refreshing, I will say.
Yeah, so we are happy to be here to basically geek out over our favorite books and movies and get all of the stuff that's inside of our heads out into the world and share it with everyone.
And there's a lot, trust me. And I'm John. I am an author and sometimes photographer. I've written for basically all my life. I like to call myself a storyteller more than a writer because some of my first stuff when I was very, very little was just picture books. I have 3 published novels, 1 science fiction and 2 horror novels. A 4th one, another horror novel, is coming out on September 29th of 2023. So check that out.
Special tip about that novel that's coming out. Who was it that did the audiobook narration for it?
Oh, the name escapes me, and it's going to take some thought to remember that. Who was it? I think the name started with a D. It was Dean Bradley.
Yes,
the other host.
It was me.
Yes, I'm just a very mean person.
we collaborate on more than just a podcast. So if you're into horror novels, at least for this trilogy.
Yeah, but he did a fantastic job. I do have to commend him. He was always receptive to ideas. And I wrote the book with one mindset, as most writers do, because you think it's a very singular pursuit, but then he introduced so many different angles to me. So I do have to applaud him here.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
We actually, and we will have a full-length episode coming in a few weeks on that particular topic. We're going to be talking to John about his books.
Yep. The books, the collaboration, the process, the whole 9 yards. Anyway, so just as Dean mentioned his favorite genres, mine, I'm pretty open when it comes to genres. I'm willing to read almost anything. I will say I have a predilection or predisposition, whatever the word you choose, towards horror, fantasy, science fiction, a lot of genre fiction. I definitely don't hold to that whole thing of genre fiction, ugh.
Yeah, no, me neither. If it's good, I want to read it. If they're banning it, I want to read it.
Even more.
If it's something that's a similar perspective to mine, I want to read it. If it's a different perspective to mine, I want to read it.
Exactly.
I like movies too, but I'm a reader.
I like
by far and large.
I was a film major in college, so definitely books and movies. The way I usually put it, because I majored in film, minored in English. Writing is my wife, filmmaking is my mistress, I would say. Yeah, I heard that phrase somewhere with something else, and I was like, ooh, that's a good one. It's juicy. So I took it.
Yeah, it fits.
Yes. But no. Anyway.
So, John, what can our listeners expect from this podcast? Why are we discussing stories, and what are we going to be discussing?
Well, I mean, it started because we both just love stories, and considering like how I said I consider myself a storyteller, and you as a musician, and you know, you do a little bit of graphic art and all that stuff. You're a storyteller as well in its own vein. Storytelling takes many forms. So this podcast, it's a little bit free form. Admittedly, like we're not following a very strict line of, oh, we just do this. We're following, we look at stories, we look at films, books, all different genres, music. We'll talk about what we like, what we don't like, just like you've said. When you mentioned that, I thought of a quote from William Faulkner where he said, read bad literature just as much as you do good literature, because then you know what to avoid, and you also see the other side of things. So I guess what you could expect from this podcast is a little bit of anything and everything. I mean, we even talk about video games at some point. That's on the list.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, especially, I mean, obviously pre-COVID, we've both, you know, been creatives for decades at this point.
Yeah.
You know, but over COVID, you know, we definitely were able to take our time and enjoy a lot of different things that we normally may not have had the time before. You know, I took time to read the entire Wheel of Time series. I read half of Shakespeare's plays. I think I read over a book a week in the year of either 2020 or 2021. So and John and I would just, you know, over lockdown, we talked frequently, and a lot of what we talked about was what we were reading, what are the movies we watched, what are the TV shows coming out that we want to see, and we kind of just decided that there's got to be other people out there that enjoy the same things we do and talk about them in more than just a plot-driven sense, but kind of get down into the nitty-gritty, you know, about the authors or the filmmakers and the creators and what's their process, and being creatives ourselves, how we're influenced by others. And we want to bring people on who are creatives and who, you know, read frequently or watch movies, or, you know, we want to talk to people. You know, we say stories and we throw the word story around, but we just want to talk to people about creatives, about the art they make, about where it comes from inside of them. Is there a point they're trying to make? Are they doing it for themselves? You know, is there money involved? Why is there money involved? All sorts of different things. You know, we've got the writer's strike in Hollywood going on right now. There's so much to talk about and cover. So we just wanted to kind of give you a brief overview here about what to possibly expect in some upcoming episodes.
Exactly. And I mean, like how you said about the pandemic, I mean, before the pandemic where we were working together, it was always interesting talking to different kinds of people, because I mean, this might not be pertinent, but you know, some people you would talk about a certain media or a certain book and you'd get into like in-depth conversations with them about it. And other people, it was like, oh, did you see this? Yeah, it was good. And then that was the extent of the conversation. But I feel like everyone is fascinated by how such a thing is put together. I mean, you look at a film or even a book, it's like how you mentioned Wheel of Time, or like over the pandemic, for example, I played The Witcher 3, which is a gargantuan game, but I had the time, and I did the first draft of a fantasy trilogy. That's like 1,500 pages. It's like one of those things people are interested in. How did something so large or so vast, so intricate get put together? So that's, like you said, that's one of the things we'll be here to discuss. It's like the creative process that goes into that creation, and how something that, you know, like you composing a song or making lyrics, like I do not have a poetic mind. I can't rhyme for the life of me. So it's like, that's fascinating to me. Whereas other people are like, how did you sit down and write a 300-page book or a 200-page script? And it's like, to me, it's like, I use the phrase, I farted it out. Yeah. Because it just seems so second nature. And yet then it's like you step back and you realize it's really not. Like, everyone has those little talents. And this is where we discuss that. Yeah, I mean, even over the pandemic, another thing we did, like how you mentioned, we would always check in with what books we were reading. We actually had a very, very brief book club with a friend of ours named Carla, who we hope to have on this podcast one day.
Yes, definitely.
I think we only read one book, so it was a very...
Yeah, it started out with one, though.
Octavia Butler, Elder? What was it called?
Which one? Oh, no, it was Kindred.
Kindred, yes. It was a fantastic book, even though I
Yeah.
did not remember the title just then.
But there were a lot of other books that we talked about that you got, like Lolita, for example. Like, you guys had read Lolita and I had not read Lolita, and Carla convinced me to listen to the audiobook, so we might not have all read it at the same time, but there was a lot of that where we were talking about that stuff, and John and I decided we wanted to keep doing that after the pandemic. And so that's kind of what we're trying to do here, and we are going to have a book of the month going on with this podcast. Every month in each episode, we'll remind you what the book of the month is and let you know when we are going to air an episode where we talk about it. So we invite everyone who wants to pick up a copy of that book, rent it from your library, download it to your phone, however you want to do it. And we'll, a full month for everyone to read it. And then, we're going to have a discussion where John and I talk about the book, and not necessarily just the plot. We're going to try to keep them relatively spoiler-free. If there are spoilers, we'll tell you at the beginning of the episode. And then, so that way there's kind of a current common thing where we may be some of the episodes we may be talking about genres or styles or movies that maybe our listeners aren't as familiar with, or it's not quite their jam. But hopefully with a book of the month, there's, at least one episode every single month that everyone can kind of dive into the same piece of media and talk about it, and talk about the author and its period in time and the effects it had on the industry, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly. And it's, again, this is a very, very, I want to almost say collaborative experience, because we're reading these books and we invite you to read them along with us. So if you're listening to this on YouTube, please leave a comment saying what you thought of the book, if you thought it sucked, if you thought it was great, what your ideas were. If you're listening to this on a podcast, feel free to email us, chat with us. We're here because we love stories, and we're inviting you to share whatever level of love you have with it as well, because everyone loves a good story at some point in their life.
John, what's our first book of the month?
So our first book of the month is The Splendid and the Vile by Erik Larson. He's a very well-known and very well-established nonfiction writer.
The New York best-selling author.
Oh, yes.
Of multiple books.
He's written multiple books. I know the ones that I've read have been Dead Wake, about the sinking of the Lusitania, In the Garden of Beasts, which is pre-World War II Germany and an American ambassador, and The Devil in the White City, about the 1930 Chicago World Fair and the first American serial killer of some repute, H.H. Holmes. This book, his newest one, I believe it is, The Splendid and the Vile, is about Winston Churchill's first year. I believe it's almost exactly his first year as Prime Minister of England, which coincided with the beginnings of the London bombings. And it's very detailed, intricate, and intimate, I would say, portrait of particularly Churchill and his family, as well as many of the high-ranking Germans, many citizens of London. So I'm looking forward to reading that very much. I'm a big Erik Larson fan, and I'm not a huge nonfiction reader, to be honest.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. I am a nonfiction reader. I love reading history books. If I could go back and take my senior high school history class again, I totally would. With a much better understanding of the world now, in my mid-30s, and not when I was, 17 or 18. So I am very excited for this book. I find lots of different aspects of World War II history very fascinating, and there are some very fascinating people and personalities that came out of that era.
Yes.
So hopefully you guys will pick that up and read it with us. Again, it's called The Splendid and the Vile by Erik Larson. It came out, I believe,
2020, I think.
September. I thought it was 2022.
I know it was during the pandemic. I know the author had just moved to New York a few years prior, and this was the first novel I think he wrote new in that city.
We should have looked this up before this. I'm looking it up.
Yes.
So we're hoping everyone joins along with us in listening, reading, however you want,
being read to, whatever your format of choice is.
I just want to. When was 2020? Okay, you were right. It's 2020.
Yeah, score one.
And so we just wanted to give a brief little intro episode here to kind of give you an idea of what's coming up. In our first official episode, John and I are going to be discussing the different types of storytelling mediums.
Mm-hmm.
Now, John, can you tell us a little bit about what that means?
So, as I mentioned before, storytelling takes many different forms. There's books, movies, television, music, comics, etc., etc., except video games. There's so many.
Spoken word.
What?
Spoken word.
Spoken word. We're looking at Homer. It's like, so we're going to be discussing many of those different formats. Are formats of choice. As I said, musician, writer, and most people are enjoyers of films and television, classical pastimes. We're going to be talking about the differences, why one story might be suited to one medium versus another. And also concerning why we focus on different mediums as well. What attracts us, what, at least from a personal sense, why are some of my stories better suited for books, short stories, or film scripts? It's like, that's going to be the first episode, discussing that among many other things.
Yeah, and hopefully there's some good little nuggets that you're able to pick up on, and the next time you pick up a book or watch a movie, whether it's one we have discussed yet or not, maybe there is something you'll take away that maybe will give you a little bit more appreciation for something, especially if it's something you maybe didn't think you would enjoy, and you still won't enjoy it, but maybe you'll take a little bit more appreciation, and that's kind of what we're hoping for. I mean, bad art is still art, right?
Exactly.
And there's still something to learn from it. And good art should always be criticized.
Exactly. Good art criticized, bad art recognized for why you think it's bad. Just like the William Faulkner quote I just said. And take in just as much bad as good, because then you learn what not to do. And you can also better define why you don't like something.
Or you can purposefully do it, for satire.
Exactly.
I mean, there's so many different routes you could take with it. So
exactly. It's like being a picky eater.
Yeah. So we're hoping that this is a fun podcast. We want some laughs. We're probably going to have some opinions that maybe not everyone agrees with. We're going to try to not get overtly political, but as with a lot of art and a lot of stories have a political grounding and a political basis in them. And so it's something that's going to get brought up.
Mm-hmm. So let's keep it civil. Let's keep it diplomatic, as I'm sure anyone has heard many times before and perhaps are tired of hearing. We're all people. We all are entitled to our own opinions as long as they don't stop on anyone else.
John and I very much are aware that people have different backgrounds. People grow up in different environments, and those environments shape who you are and what your views are.
Right. This podcast is also about being inquisitive, looking. Because the whole point of stories, to me, is that you are being given a window into someone's soul, whether you prescribe to the opinion of, writing is, cutting your veins open and bleeding on the page. Someone put part of themselves onto whatever it is, whatever medium it is, in order to be understood and heard. And, there's value in that. So even if it's not a viewpoint you agree with, it should be one that should be recognized. That is definitely preachy, but...
It is preachy, but I think it's fair, and we definitely do our best with each other to offer devil's advocate opinions and options, even if they're not necessarily ones we agree with. They are worth talking about, and they are worth they're worth considering. They're worth discussing.
Oh yes.
Regardless of their merit.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So we hope you all enjoy this podcast. Tune in next week. Or maybe later this week, depending on when they get released.
It's very loose.
For our next episode on media differences. We're hoping to release at least probably about an episode a week is the plan. Once we have that finalized, maybe I'll punch that into this part of the podcast. But for now, we hope you enjoy. Again, I'm Dean.
And I'm John.
And this is Storyweavers.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Storyweavers. As ever, we're incredibly grateful to all of our listeners and contributors. Come back next week for the next installment of Storyweavers.